So hard rock and heavy metal, it's all about rebellion, right? And Christianity, that's all about redemption. These two worlds, they were supposed to be enemies. So what happens when some of rock's biggest rebels suddenly find faith?
Just picture this for a second. You're Brian Head Welch, the guitarist for the absolute metal giant Korn. You stumble through the door after a 3-day meth binge, and you hear your little girl singing along to one of your songs. And the song she's singing? AIDS. Yeah, you probably know what that stands for. All day I dream about sex. For Welch, that single moment of horror was the breaking point, the thing that sparked one of the most unbelievable spiritual transformations in modern music.
Okay, so to really get just how shocking these conversions were, we gotta take a step back and remember what rock was rebelling against in the first place. The whole point of the genre was to be a reaction to the very values these artists would later end up embracing. You really can't get more opposite than this. On one side, you've got the brand of rock, rebellion, total excess, and this real fascination with darkness. And on the other side, the core principles of Christianity: faith, sobriety, redemption. These weren't just, different lifestyles. They were completely opposing ways of looking at the world. And look, this rebellion, it wasn't exactly subtle. We're talking about guys like Blackie Lawless from Wasp, who would wear a codpiece with an actual saw blade on it and hurl raw meat into the audience. Or Alice Cooper, the guy who basically invented shock rock, whose shows were like these theatrical horror fests with guillotines and tons of fake blood. Even a band like Iron Maiden, which was way more literary, couldn't get away from being accused of Satanism. This was the world these guys created. So you have to ask, what on earth could push someone from that world to a life of faith? Well, for pretty much every single one of them, it all started with a crisis, a moment where everything just came crashing down. Let's circle back to Brian Welch. That moment with his daughter, it wasn't just a wake-up call. It was a full-blown spiritual earthquake. It was like he was forced to see his own life through her innocent eyes, and it absolutely terrified him. It's what pushed him to get sober and find a new path, which eventually led him to get baptized in the Jordan River. And believe me, this decision had huge consequences. When Welch left Korn back in 2005, he didn't just walk away from a band. He walked away from a $25 million record deal. This wasn't some casual change of heart. It was a massive, life-altering sacrifice that just goes to show how powerful that breaking point really was. And he wasn't the only one. That theme of hitting rock bottom, it's pretty much universal for all these guys. For Dave Mustaine of Megadeth, it was a really bad arm injury that basically threatened to end his entire career. For Alice Cooper, it was his wife filing for divorce to try and save him from his addictions. For others, it was their careers completely failing or a brutal fight with depression. Every story is different, but the catalyst is always the same: a crisis. All right, so you've had this life-changing revelation, you've embraced Christianity. Now what, right? How do you even navigate a career that you built on rebellion when you've suddenly found redemption? And maybe more importantly, how are your fans going to react? Well, the paths they took were all over the map, really. You've got Dan Spitz from Anthrax, who just left music pretty much for good and became this world-class watchmaker. Then there's Brian Welch, who left Korn, wrote a best-selling book about his whole journey, and then years later actually rejoined the band. Others, like Dave Mustaine and Korn's bassist Fieldy, they stayed. Mustaine brought his faith into his work by refusing to tour with bands he felt were satanic, while Fieldy figured out how to live his new life while still performing Korn's super dark and explicit songs. For the longest time, let's be honest, Christian rock was kind of seen as this compromise, right? Like, it could never be as real or as big as the secular stuff. But then, in the 80s, this one band came along and just shattered that idea completely. And that band was Stryper. With their wild yellow and black outfits and their habit of tossing Bibles into the crowd, they looked just like any other glam metal band. But their message was openly Christian. And guess what? It totally worked. They were the first Christian band ever to have 2 songs, Free and Honestly, in MTV's top 10 at the exact same time. Their album To Hell with the Devil went platinum. They proved that faith and metal couldn't just coexist, they could actually conquer the mainstream. Okay, so commercial success is one thing, but what about the deeper challenge, the personal one? How do you actually reconcile these two totally different parts of yourself? How do you balance this dark, theatrical stage persona with a private life of faith? And, there's really no one who embodies this struggle and the eventual reconciliation better than Alice Cooper. His dad was a preacher, and he grew up in the church long before he became the king of shock rock. This quote, it just gets right to the heart of his journey, this idea of returning to the faith he had walked away from. I mean, just look at the duality of his life. On stage, he's Alice Cooper, the horror icon with the guillotines and all the fake blood. But offstage, he's Vincent Fernier, a devout Christian who teaches Bible study and says his faith is what saved him from his addictions. He's always insisted that the stage show is pure theater, it's not his lifestyle. And by doing that, he found a way to make both halves of his life work together. And he's not the only one. Take Nicko McBrain, the drummer for Iron Maiden, a band that was once at the very center of the whole satanic panic thing. He found his faith in 1999. And he says he sees zero conflict between his job in one of the biggest metal bands in the world and his life as a Christian. He'll even give his testimony at churches in between their world tours. So what's the big takeaway from this totally unlikely collision of worlds? These stories are way more than just celebrity gossip. They dig into some really deep questions about who we are, about faith, and about transformation. Maybe the most powerful lesson here is this. Finding faith doesn't always mean you have to completely erase who you used to be. The fact that Brian Welch and Fieldy both went back to Korn, embracing their new lives while re-engaging with their old art, really proves that. They found a way to integrate their redemption into their story, instead of just starting a totally new one. Ultimately, these musicians kind of force us to ask a really fascinating question. Their lives suggest that, hey, maybe rebellion and redemption aren't complete opposites after all. Maybe they're just two sides of the same very human journey. A search for meaning, whether you find it on a stage in front of thousands of people or in a quiet moment of prayer.